Shabbat Shalom. So it happened in the days of David Melech, the days of King David, that the elders of the nation recognized that the economy wasn't doing so well. We might be able to sympathize a little bit. And so they came to the king, because the king was in charge, and the king was supposed to be doing something about this, and he said, Your Majesty, the people need help. They cannot thrive under these conditions. And so David's first answer to the elders was, let them support each other. Essentially self-sustaining economy, right? If Reuben has the crops and if Shlomo has the pots, then they should sell them to each other, and then the economy is fine because there's lots of transactions going on. You know, the money just moves. Well, the money would just move from person to person, from person to person, from person to person. To which the elders pointed out, Economic Theory 101, you cannot fill a hole with the dirt you dug from it. Meaning you always are going to lose something from all of those transactions, and if you don't have a new influx of wealth, a new influx of capital, of property, that eventually the hole is going to get deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. And by the way, you can, after Shabbat, try that experiment for yourself. Dig a hole and see whether the dirt you put back in fills it to the top. It won't. What's that? You always run out of dirt? Okay. So then David said, then we will go forth in war. The next means of gathering new material, of new capital, of new property, of new land, would be to take it from someone else. Right? Right? If we don't have enough to support ourselves from within, then we'll have to expand our borders to be able to have more that we can then support ourselves with. And this is what's known as a Milchemet Reshut. This is what's known as a voluntary war, or an optional war. This is a war that is not planned from the beginning, but seemed like a good idea at the time. And for this war, David then had to go to the Sanhedrin and seek their approval for the war. He had to go to the generals to make sure that there were indeed enough troops levied, as we saw. That census is very important in this week's Torah portion. And they had to go to the priests to check with the Urim and Tumim the semi-prophetic stones of the Choshen, of the breastpiece that was worn by the Kohen Gadol, to make sure that God approved of it. So, don't get us wrong, there were some checks and balances to make sure the king wasn't just marauding and attacking whatever he felt like, whenever he felt like. But for these Milchemet Reshut, this war that was optional, after these things had been taken into place, the people would be mustered. Right? After everything was taken into consideration and everyone agreed, both the Sanhedrin, the generals, and apparently God, that this war was fine, then you had the draft. And once the draft was full, we sent some people home. You may remember this from our other Torah studies throughout the years. Who gets to go home from the draft and doesn't have to fight? Newly married, yes. Newly built house, newly planted vineyard or orchard, and cowards. Cowards, if someone was drafted and they said, are you a coward? And they said yes, they said, you go home now. Because if you come to the field of battle with us, and then you lose your courage, and you start running, you will start a panic, and that's worse than not having you in our ranks in the first place. And so the cowards were excused from the duty. Now, everybody who was excused did have other logistical responsibilities they had to take part of. They had to make sure there were safe roads and that there were things being delivered to the front and all of the things that are necessary for an army to march. But they did not have to fight in the actual battles and risk their lives. But that's not the only category of war. There is also what is known as a Milchemet Mitzvah. There is a commanded war. There is a mitzvah war that we have to wage. And yes, there are such things as mitzvah wars. I can hear in the back of your mind, you're probably thinking, but I'll say shalom. God is the one who makes peace. God is the one who wants peace. Our most ubiquitous blessing is a blessing of peace. It is how we greeted each other on this Shabbat. Shabbat shalom. How can we say that God is an instrument of war, that God wants war? It's not that God wants war. But under certain circumstances, war is an absolute necessary. It is obligatory, and you cannot choose otherwise. As we will be learning about, and thank you for the commercial, as we will be learning about this very evening, there is the example of the war against the Amalekites, the war against Amalek, which was a milchemet mitzvah, which was a commanded war, because God commanded us as a nation, and then King Saul individually, to lead the people against the Amalekites. More on that tonight, absolutely, but it is a perfect example. So too was the war against the seven nations as we conquered the land of Canaan in order to restore our heritage in the land of Israel. Those also were obligatory wars. They were a war of a commandment, a war of the mitzvah. And also, wars of self-defense. Wars where Israel's very existence is threatened are also wars of mitzvah. Those are not optional wars. If it is a choice between surrender and peace and fighting and continuing our country, we are obligated to fight in order that we can continue as a country, as a people. And for those wars, the Melchemet Mitzvah, you don't get to go home. Everybody fought in those wars. It didn't matter if you were being taken from the chuppah itself, as in our rabbinic language, and taken to the front line. If that was necessary to defend our people, that was what would happen. It didn't matter if you had just finished planting, if you had just put the mezuzah on your home and not even walked through its door. If it was necessary to fight, you were taken to the front lines to fight, because there is nothing more important and more time-bound than the timely defense of our people. Any questions? Doing okay? Okay. So if this Melchemet Mitzvah, especially of self-defense, because the other categories of Melchemet Mitzvah, the other categories of obligatory war are no longer operative in a legal sense. That is to say, there is no more seven nations of Canaan, there is no more Amalekites to be fighting against. The only category that is left is that of self-defense. If this category is so preeminent in the hierarchy of mitzvot that you can be taken from the chuppah to the front line on the same day, why aren't we all soldiers? Why on Memorial Day do we memorialize those few who were soldiers? Or on Veterans Days, those few that have become veterans? Why are we not all soldiers constantly? It has to do with our very first question of King David. Constantly, if we were all constantly soldiers, what would happen to our people? And indeed, nowadays, war is more constant. It is more a 24/7 affair, and it requires greater training and precision and dedication than ever before. Which means in order for war to be waged properly in defense of our people, whether it be this country or whether it be Israel, you need to have a professional standing army. There is simply no other way to wage war now. If we were simply to hand out rifles and say, okay, everybody, let's go fight, it would be slaughter and chaos. Well, we don't even have to wonder what it would look like. You can look at places like Syria, of what happens when you simply give a rifle to everyone and tell them to fight. It is a bloodbath, and not a very effective way of waging war either. We have learned over the centuries that by having a select few be best trained and best supported by the nation, backed up by a general draft only when absolutely necessary to have greater numbers, that we are much better able to achieve the twin goals of defending ourselves and of also thriving during the peacetime. So we still have on the books Melchemet Mitzvah of self-defense. And we have handed off the responsibility of that, both in this country as well as in Israel, to a corps of professional soldiers, although in Israel, because of the constant threat, the draft is also essential. But when we hand over that responsibility because of their expertise and the nature of modern war, we cannot let go of our feeling of obligation, our feeling that we too should be on that battlefield, and though we are not, or perhaps because we are not, all the more so we must honor those who are. All the more so we must show them our gratitude. All the more so we must give them our thanks when they make the ultimate sacrifice of giving their life for the defense of our freedom and our people. This doesn't mean we don't get to debate exactly what counts as self-defense and not self-defense, of what it means to be pursuing our self-defense interests or what it means to be pursuing other interests. It doesn't mean we can't debate about the rules of engagement and how war is waged, of what is a legitimate target and what is a not legitimate target. We are allowed to have and must have all of those debates and discussions over and over and over again, forever, to show that we do truly care about what our country does. But those who follow the instructions, those who carry out the defense of our land, deserve our unending and undying gratitude and all the honor that we can show them. So on this Memorial Day, as we light up our barbecues, or we go to the beach, or even as we sit and celebrate Shavuot, the giving of the Torah, make sure that you also find in your heart and in your celebrations at least a moment for the gratitude of those who have made it possible. Shabbat Shalom. Page 354, we continue our service with Musaf as we are led by Judy Chiddi.